They say grief has no timeline, but nobody prepared me for the moment when the person you trust most in the world decides your pain doesn't matter. My name is Anna, and for 30 years, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought I understood what family meant. I was wrong about so many things. The silence in my garage has become my closest companion these days. It's where I sit every morning with my coffee, staring at the empty space where our 1967 Mustang used to live. The oil stains on the concrete floor are all that remain of 3 decades of dreams, Sunday afternoons, and the sound of my husband Robert's laughter echoing off these walls. Robert died 6 months ago. A heart attack at 58, sudden, cruel, and final. One moment he was planning our weekend trip to the coast, talking about taking the Mustang for a drive along the ocean. The next moment, paramedics were telling me there was nothing more they could do. In an instant, I became a widow, and that beautiful red car became the only piece of him I had left to hold on to. We'd bought that Mustang when we were young and foolish, spending money we didn't have on a rusted shell of a car that most people would have sent to the junkyard. But Robert saw something in it that I didn't understand then. He saw potential. He saw us, working side by side, bringing something beautiful back to life. For 30 years, we spent our Saturdays in this garage, his hands teaching mine how to hold a wrench properly, how to listen to an engine's rhythm, how to see beyond the rust and dents to the masterpiece waiting underneath. I learned that restoration isn't just about cars. It's about patience, dedication, and the belief that broken things can become beautiful again if you're willing to invest enough love and time. When our son Michael was little, he'd sit on an overturned bucket, watching his father work, asking endless questions about carburetors and timing chains. Robert would explain everything twice, 3 times if necessary, never losing patience with curious little hands that wanted to touch everything. "Someday, buddy," he'd say, "this will be yours. You'll understand what we built here together." Those words haunt me now, because apparently, Michael did understand. He understood that the car was valuable. He understood that I was vulnerable. He understood that a grieving widow might be too broken to fight back when someone decided to steal the last piece of her heart. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sorting through Robert's clothes, a task that had taken me 6 months to find the courage to begin. Michael's voice was cheerful, casual, as if he was discussing the weather or asking about dinner plans. "Mom, I have great news. Jennifer's birthday is coming up, and I've planned something really special. We're going to Dubai for 2 weeks. 5-star hotel, spa treatments, the works. She deserves it after everything she's been through. Everything she's been through." As if 35 years old was ancient. As if her minor struggles at work compared to losing the love of your life. As if her disappointment about not getting promoted was equivalent to watching paramedics work frantically on your husband's chest, while knowing deep in your soul that he was already gone. "That sounds lovely, dear," I managed, folding Robert's favorite flannel shirt with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "I'm sure she'll enjoy it. Here's the thing, Mom. The trip is expensive and you know how tight things have been lately. But I found a solution. I sold Dad's car. Got $45,000 for it. Can you believe that? All those years he spent working on that old thing, and it actually turned out to be worth something." The shirt fell from my hands. The room tilted sideways, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The words echoed in my mind like gunshots, each one finding its target with devastating precision. Sold. Dad's car. Worth something. "You... what?" My voice came out as a whisper, barely audible even to myself. "I sold the Mustang." "Come on, Mom, don't make that voice. It was just sitting there collecting dust. Dad's gone, and you don't even drive it. At least this way it's doing some good, helping us make memories with Jennifer. Dad would have wanted us to be happy, right?" If you enjoy emotional stories like this one, please subscribe to our channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and it really helps our work. And comment which city you're watching from. Just sitting there collecting dust. The car that Robert had spent 30 years restoring. The vehicle we'd driven on our first date after the restoration was complete. The Mustang that still smelled faintly of his cologne and the leather conditioner he applied religiously every month. The car where we'd sat together just days before he died, planning our retirement road trip across the country. mapping out all the small towns and scenic routes we wanted to explore together. "Michael," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, "that car wasn't yours to sell." "Technically, Mom, it kind of was. Dad left everything to both of us, remember? And let's be honest. What are you going to do with a car like that? You're 55, not 25. Jennifer and I are young. We have our whole lives ahead of us. We can actually use the money to build something meaningful. Build something meaningful. With the wreckage of my marriage, my memories, my last connection to the man who had been my world for 3 decades. I wanted to scream, to demand he tell me where my car was, to insist he reverse whatever transaction had ripped away the final piece of my husband's legacy. Instead, I heard myself saying, "I see." Those 2 words carried the weight of every disappointment, every moment of taking the high road, every instance of swallowing my pain to keep peace in a family that apparently didn't value peace when it came to my feelings. "I see." The response of a woman who had spent 55 years learning to make herself smaller, quieter, more accommodating. "I knew you'd understand, Mom. You've always been so reasonable about everything. And hey, Jennifer says she'll send you lots of pictures from Dubai. You'll love seeing all the fancy places we visit. Pictures of my daughter-in-law enjoying a vacation funded by the sale of my husband's legacy. Images of luxury purchased with the demolition of my last sanctuary. Snapshots of their happiness built on the foundation of my heartbreak." After I hung up the phone, I walked to the garage and stood in that empty space where the Mustang used to live. The silence was deafening, filled with the ghost of memories that would never be made, conversations that would never happen, Sunday afternoon restoration sessions that would never resume. I touched the wall where Robert's tools still hung, each one in its designated place, waiting for hands that would never hold them again. And for the first time since his funeral, I allowed myself to truly cry. Not just for my husband, but for the naive woman who had believed that family meant something more than convenience and profit. The days following that phone call blurred together like watercolors in the rain. I kept expecting Michael to call back, to tell me he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd somehow reverse the sale and bring back the only piece of Robert I had left. But the phone remained silent, and that silence spoke louder than any words ever could. When Jennifer's social media posts started appearing, each one felt like a deliberate slap across my face. There she was, posing in front of their first-class airline seats with the caption, "Dreams do come true when you have the right partner." Her manicured fingers held champagne glasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and her smile radiated the kind of joy that comes from getting exactly what you want without caring about the cost to others. The photos kept coming. Jennifer in a gold bikini by an infinity pool, caption reading, "Living my best life in Dubai." Jennifer getting a massage at some exclusive spa, arms spread wide with pure bliss on her face. Jennifer shopping in designer boutiques, her arms full of bags from stores I'd only seen in magazines. Each image was another reminder that my grief had been converted into her pleasure, that Robert's legacy had become her Instagram content. I tried calling Michael 3 times that first week. Each call went straight to voicemail, and my messages went unanswered. When he finally did call back, his voice carried the impatient tone of someone who felt he was being bothered about something trivial. "Mom, we've been through this already. The car is sold, the money is spent, and we're having an amazing time. Can't you just be happy for us? Dad wouldn't want you dwelling on material possessions when his son is out there living life to the fullest." Living life to the fullest. On the ruins of my marriage, my memories, my connection to the man I'd loved for 30 years. I wanted to ask him if he remembered being 7 years old, sitting in that passenger seat while his father taught him how to shift gears. I wanted to remind him of the Christmas morning when he was 12 and found a model Mustang under the tree, an exact replica of ours, and how his eyes had lit up as he promised to take care of the real one someday. Instead, I found myself apologizing. "I'm sorry, honey. You're right. I just miss him so much, and the car felt like what, Mom? Like a shrine. That's not healthy. Jennifer says you need to focus on moving forward instead of living in the past. Maybe you should consider grief counseling or something," Jennifer says. Those 2 words had become the preface to every decision in my son's life. every judgment about my behavior, every criticism of my choices. My daughter-in-law, who had known Robert for exactly 5 years, apparently understood my grieving process better than I did. A woman who had never lost anyone more significant than a childhood pet was now the expert on how I should process the death of my husband. "Maybe you're right," I whispered, because it was easier than fighting, easier than explaining that some wounds don't heal according to other people's timelines. The neighbors began to notice the empty garage. Mrs. Patterson from next door, who had always admired the Mustang's glossy red paint and chrome details, asked me one morning why I wasn't taking it out for drives anymore. "Oh, Michael sold it," I said, trying to keep my voice casual as if discussing the weather. "They needed the money for a vacation." The look on her face made me realize how that sounded to someone on the outside. Her expression shifted from curiosity to something that looked uncomfortably like pity, and I saw myself through her eyes. A grieving widow whose son had sold her most precious possession to fund his wife's birthday trip. "I'm so sorry, Anna," she said softly. "I know how much that car meant to you and Robert." Her kindness almost broke me right there on the sidewalk, because she understood what Michael refused to see, that the car wasn't just metal and chrome and leather seats. It was every Saturday morning spent working side by side with my husband. Every Sunday, drive to nowhere in particular. Every moment when we'd sit in the driver's seat together and plan our future while the engine warmed up in the driveway. Word spread through the neighborhood with the quiet efficiency of small-town gossip. I could feel the sympathy in people's glances, the way conversations paused when I walked by, the careful way friends asked about how I was doing. Everyone seemed to understand, except the two people who should have understood most. When Michael and Jennifer returned from Dubai, they invited me to dinner to share their amazing experiences. I sat in their dining room, surrounded by duty-free shopping bags and souvenirs, listening to detailed accounts of every meal, every excursion, every moment of their life-changing vacation. "Mom, you should have seen the car rental we got," Michael said, showing me pictures on his phone. A red Ferrari convertible. Jennifer looked absolutely stunning in it. The color reminded me of Dad's old Mustang, actually. The color reminded him of Dad's old Mustang, as if it was already a distant memory, something from the ancient past rather than the car that had been sitting in my garage just 3 weeks earlier. As if 30 years of restoration work and memories could be reduced to a casual color comparison with a rental car that would be returned and forgotten within days. Jennifer laughed, leaning against Michael's shoulder with the satisfaction of a woman who had gotten everything she wanted. "We should get you a nice trip somewhere, Anna. Maybe a cruise or something more age-appropriate. Dubai might be a bit too intense for someone your age, but there are lots of lovely options for mature travelers." Age-appropriate. Mature travelers. I was 55 years old, not 90. I had traveled the world with Robert, hiked mountains and explored cities and driven that Mustang down highways that stretched from coast to coast. But apparently, my daughter-in-law had decided I was now ready for shuffleboard and early bird specials, too old for anything that might be considered adventurous or exciting. "That's very thoughtful," I managed, watching Michael nod along as if Jennifer's assessment of my capabilities was perfectly reasonable. This was my son, the boy I had raised, the child I had sacrificed for, the young man I had supported through college and career changes and relationship troubles. And he sat there nodding while his wife implied I was too old and fragile for anything but the most sedate forms of entertainment. As the evening wore on, I realized something had shifted in our family dynamic. I was no longer Michael's mother. I was his burden. I wasn't Jennifer's mother-in-law. I was her inconvenient obstacle to complete control over my son's priorities. They spoke to me with the patient condescension reserved for elderly relatives who needed to be managed rather than respected. When Jennifer showed me her favorite vacation photos for the 3rd time, pointing out designer details on her outfits and explaining the exclusivity of each location, I found myself wondering if this was what Robert would have wanted. Would he have been proud to see his son funding luxury vacations by selling the dreams we'd built together? Would he have smiled at Jennifer's casual dismissal of our 30-year marriage as something I needed to move past? The drive home that night felt longer than usual. Every red car I passed made my heart skip, Every classic vehicle reminded me of Sunday mornings in the garage. Every mile between their house and mine emphasized the growing distance between who I used to be and who I was becoming in their eyes. Back in my empty garage, I sat in Robert's old chair and tried to remember what it felt like to matter to someone, to be valued for more than my ability to quietly accept whatever decisions other people made about my life. The silence was different now. Not just empty, but hollow, as if even the walls understood that something essential had been stolen and would never be returned. I closed my eyes and tried to hear Robert's voice, tried to remember his laugh, tried to feel his presence in the space where we had been so happy together. But all I could hear was Jennifer's laughter and Michael's casual dismissal of 30 years of love, reduced to Dad's old car. That night, I understood that losing Robert had been only the first loss. Now I was losing my son, my sense of family, and my belief that love was stronger than greed. The car had been sold, but so had something much more valuable. The respect and consideration I had thought were mine by right, as a mother, as a widow, as a human being who had loved deeply and lost everything. The invitation arrived on expensive cardstock, the kind that Jennifer insisted on for every social occasion. "You're invited to celebrate Jennifer's 36th birthday," it proclaimed in gold lettering, complete with dress code specifications and a note about the upscale venue they had selected for the occasion. I stared at that invitation for a long time, running my fingers over the embossed details that had probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. 36 years old, and apparently this milestone required a celebration worthy of royalty, funded by the sale of my husband's life's work. The party was held at the Riverside Country Club, a venue I had driven past countless times but never entered. The valet parking, the marble columns, the crystal chandeliers, everything spoke of the kind of luxury that Jennifer believed she deserved, that Michael seemed happy to provide at any cost. I arrived wearing my best dress, a navy blue outfit I had bought for Robert's company Christmas parties years ago. It was classic, tasteful, and probably hopelessly outdated by Jennifer's standards. But it was what I had, and it carried memories of evenings when Robert would zip it up for me, kiss my neck, and tell me I looked beautiful. The first hour was a masterclass in feeling invisible. Jennifer held court in the center of the room, surrounded by her friends and colleagues, regaling them with stories from Dubai. Every few sentences she would gesture dramatically, her new jewelry catching the light, her designer dress flowing as she reenacted moments from their life-changing vacation. "And then Michael surprised me with this incredible shopping spree," she gushed to a captivated audience. "He told me to buy whatever I wanted. That money was no object because we had come into some unexpected resources. It was like a fairy tale. Unexpected resources. That's what 30 years of my marriage had become in her vocabulary, not the result of careful planning, loving restoration, or the dreams Robert and I had built together. Just unexpected resources that had appeared at the perfect moment to fund her birthday fantasies." Michael stood beside her, basking in the admiration of people who were impressed by his apparent generosity. I watched him from across the room, remembering the little boy who used to help his father change oil, who promised to take care of the Mustang someday, who once told me that our family was the most important thing in his life. When Jennifer opened her gifts, each one seemed more extravagant than the last. Designer handbags, expensive jewelry, spa packages that cost more than my monthly rent. She squealed with delight at each present, kissing Michael dramatically and thanking him for making all her dreams come true. Finally, she reached my gift. I had spent weeks choosing it carefully, a vintage photo album bound in leather, filled with pictures of our family over the years, photos of Michael as a baby, childhood birthdays, family vacations, graduations, pictures that included Robert, memories of the man who had helped create the life that was now funding this celebration. Jennifer unwrapped it with the same enthusiasm she had shown for everything else, but her expression changed when she saw what it was. She flipped through a few pages politely, her smile becoming more forced with each turn. "Oh, Anna," she said, her voice carrying the tone adults use with children who have given them macaroni necklaces. "This is so thoughtful. Old photos are nice, I suppose. Very sentimental." She set it aside quickly, moving on to the next gift without another glance. Someone had given her a silk scarf that cost more than my car payment, and her excitement returned immediately. The photo album, with its careful documentation of our family's history, sat forgotten on the gift table while she modeled accessories that would probably be discarded within a year. Later in the evening, I found myself standing alone by the windows overlooking the golf course, watching other people's conversations and wondering why I had come. The answer, of course, was hope. The foolish hope that maybe, in a social setting, surrounded by the goodwill of a celebration, Michael might remember that I was his mother, not just an inconvenience to be managed. That's when I overheard the conversation that shattered what remained of my illusions about my place in their lives. Jennifer was talking to her sister, their voices carrying just enough for me to catch the words that would replay in my mind for weeks afterward. "The mother-in-law situation is getting a bit awkward," Jennifer said, checking her lipstick in a compact mirror. "She's still obsessing over that old car Michael sold. You'd think we had committed murder or something." "What's the big deal?" her sister asked. "It was just a car, right?" "Exactly. An old car that was just sitting there collecting dust while she moped around feeling sorry for herself. Michael finally did something practical with it, and she acts like we stole the crown jewels. Honestly, some people just don't know when to move on, just sitting there collecting dust." The same words Michael had used, now repeated by his wife as if they had discussed my grief and decided together that it was unreasonable, inconvenient, and ultimately irrelevant to their plans. "She gave me this weird photo album tonight," Jennifer continued, lowering her voice but not quite enough, "full of pictures of Michael's dead father and all these family memories from before I was around. Kind of creepy, actually, like she's trying to guilt me about something." Creepy. 20 years of carefully documented family moments, birthday parties and Christmas mornings and graduations had been reduced to creepy because they included the man who had been Michael's father, my husband, the person whose love had made our family possible in the first place. "Maybe she needs professional help," her sister suggested. "Grief counseling or therapy or something. It's not healthy to cling to the past like that." That's what I keep telling Michael. But you know how men are about confronting their mothers. He just wants to keep the peace, even when she's being completely unreasonable about everything. Unreasonable. For loving my husband, for missing the car we had restored together, for wanting some acknowledgement that 30 years of marriage had meant something more than unexpected resources to fund their lifestyle upgrades. I stood there in my outdated navy dress, holding a glass of wine I couldn't afford at a party celebrating a birthday funded by the sale of my dreams, and realized that I had become the villain in their story, not the grieving widow who had lost everything, not the mother who had raised and supported and loved unconditionally. I was the obstacle, the problem, the unreasonable woman who couldn't move on quickly enough to make their lives more comfortable. The drive home that night was the loneliest of my life, even lonelier than the nights after Robert's funeral, because then I had still believed that my son loved me, that family meant something, that the bonds we had built over 30 years were stronger than the attractions of new money and social status. Now I understood that I had been naive. Love, apparently, was conditional. Family loyalty had a price point. And once you became more trouble than you were worth, once your grief became inconvenient and your memories became creepy, you were quietly edited out of the story, relegated to the role of difficult relative who needed to be managed rather than cherished. In my empty house, surrounded by the silence that had become my constant companion, I sat in Robert's favorite chair and tried to remember when I had started shrinking myself to fit other people's comfort levels. When had I learned to apologize for my own feelings, to minimize my own pain, to accept being dismissed and diminished by people who should have protected and valued me? The photo album sat on my kitchen table, returned to sender, rejected like the memories it contained. I opened it to a picture of Michael at age 10, grinning beside the Mustang with a wrench in his small hand, so proud to be helping his father with the restoration. The boy in that photo had loved me unconditionally, had promised to take care of me when I got old, had sworn that nothing would ever be more important than family. I closed the album and wept for that little boy, and for the mother who had believed his promises would last forever. Somewhere along the way, we had both become different people, The difference was that I still remembered who we used to be, while he seemed determined to forget. The weeks following Jennifer's birthday party passed like a fog of resignation. I stopped calling Michael, stopped trying to explain my feelings, stopped hoping for understanding that clearly wasn't coming. Instead, I learned to live in the silence of acceptance, the quiet despair of someone who has finally understood that fighting only makes the rejection more painful. My days developed a rhythm of emptiness. Morning coffee in the kitchen, staring at the photo album that had been returned to me like unwanted mail. Afternoon walks through the neighborhood, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who looked at me with that particular mixture of pity and discomfort that people reserve for other people's tragedies. Evening television shows that provided just enough noise to drown out the echo of my own footsteps in a house that felt too big for one person. The garage had become my sanctuary of grief. I would sit in Robert's chair, surrounded by his tools that would never be used again, breathing in the faint scent of motor oil and metal polish that still lingered in the corners. Sometimes I would close my eyes and try to hear his voice explaining the difference between a carburetor and fuel injection, or feel his hands guiding mine as I learned to use a socket wrench properly. But even those memories were becoming contaminated by the knowledge of how easily they had been discarded. How quickly 30 years of shared dreams had been converted into vacation photos and designer handbags. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, exactly 7 months after Robert's death. I was sorting through his workshop supplies, finally accepting that someone should use these tools even if that someone couldn't be me, when I found the letter he had written to Michael. It was tucked inside his toolbox, sealed in an envelope marked, "For Michael, when the car is finished." Robert's handwriting, still strong and confident, addressed to the son he had loved so deeply, the boy he had hoped would carry on the tradition of Sunday morning restorations and evening drives through the countryside. My hands trembled as I opened it, knowing I was reading words that had been meant for someone else, but desperate to hear my husband's voice one more time, even through ink on paper. "Son," it began, "if you're reading this, it means the Mustang restoration is finally complete. And more importantly, it means I'm no longer here to see your face when you realize what we've built together all these years. This car was never just about the engine or the chrome or the perfect paint job. It was about time, the most precious thing any father can give his son. Every Saturday morning we spent in this garage, every tool I taught you to use, every moment of patience when you made mistakes or lost interest, that was me investing in the man I hoped you would become. Your mother understood this project in ways that surprised me. She could have resented the hours, the expense, the grease under our fingernails at the dinner table. Instead, she became part of it. She learned alongside us, asked questions, brought us coffee and sandwiches, and never once complained about the time it took away from other things. The car belongs to both of you now, but it represents something that belongs to all three of us. The family we built together, one Sunday at a time. Take care of it, son. But more importantly, take care of her. She's given us both more than we could ever repay." I read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. Robert had understood what the car represented. He had known that selling it would be like selling our family's history, our shared commitment, our love made tangible in steel and chrome and leather seats worn smooth by countless drives together. But more devastating than anything else was his trust in Michael, his faith that the son he had raised would honor the values they had shared, would protect the woman who had supported their dreams for 30 years. Robert had died believing that Michael would take care of me, that the car would remain a symbol of family unity rather than becoming a casualty of financial opportunity. How wrong he had been. How naive we had both been to believe that love was stronger than convenience, that promises meant more than profit, that family bonds could survive the test of individual desire. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope, then sat in the growing darkness of the garage, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. Even my grief had been wrong, apparently. Even my understanding of what we had lost was flawed. I had been mourning a car, but Robert had been building something much more significant. a legacy of family values that was supposed to survive his death and bind us together across generations. That night, I called Michael one last time, not to argue about the car, not to plead for understanding, but to read him his father's letter, to give him the words Robert had written in love and hope and trust. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Michael's cheerful recorded voice invited me to leave a message, promised he would call back soon, suggested that if it was urgent, I should try Jennifer's number instead. I hung up without speaking. There was nothing urgent enough to justify disturbing their evening, nothing important enough to warrant Jennifer's patient explanation of why my call was inappropriate or poorly timed. Instead, I sat in the kitchen and wrote my own letter. Not to Michael, because he had made it clear that my words were unwelcome, but to myself. A record of what I had lost, what I had learned, what I understood now about the difference between being loved and being tolerated. Anna, I wrote, you have spent 55 years making yourself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. You have apologized for your feelings, minimized your pain, and accepted being dismissed by people who should have protected you. You have let them convince you that your grief is unreasonable, your memories are creepy, your love is inconvenient. You have forgotten that you matter. You have forgotten that your feelings are valid. You have forgotten that being a good mother doesn't mean accepting disrespect from your child. And being a loving wife doesn't mean allowing your husband's memory to be treated as nothing more than unexpected resources. Robert trusted Michael to take care of you, but Robert was wrong. Michael has chosen comfort over character, convenience over compassion. He has chosen a woman who sees you as an obstacle over the mother who raised him with love and sacrifice. But you still have choices. You can continue to shrink, to apologize, to accept being treated as a burden, or you can remember who you were before grief made you small, before loss made you grateful for scraps of attention from people who should love you unconditionally. I sealed that letter in an envelope and put it in the toolbox next to Robert's letter to Michael. 2 documents, 2 different kinds of love, 2 different outcomes. His love had been betrayed and abandoned. Mine was about to be reclaimed. The next morning I woke up feeling different. Not better exactly, but awake, alert, as if something inside me had been sleeping and was finally ready to open its eyes and see clearly. I made my coffee and sat in the garage, but instead of wallowing in what had been taken from me, I began to think about what I still had. A house that was paid for, thanks to Robert's life insurance. Savings that Michael didn't know about. Money I had inherited from my parents and kept in a separate account. Skills and knowledge that 30 years of marriage had taught me. And something else. Something I had almost forgotten I possessed. I still had something they had overlooked. Something they had dismissed as unimportant because they didn't understand its value. I still had my dignity, my intelligence, and my ability to act when action was required. But more than that, I had something that would surprise them all. I had Robert's address book, filled with the names and numbers of every mechanic, car collector, and vintage automobile enthusiast he had known over 30 years of restoration work. People who understood what the Mustang represented, who knew its history, who might be very interested to learn how it had been sold and why. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger burns hot and burns out quickly. This was something cooler, steadier, more dangerous. This was decision. This was a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for existing and started planning to reclaim what was rightfully hers. For the first time in months, I smiled. A real smile, not the forced expression I had been wearing to keep other people comfortable. This smile had teeth in it and purpose behind it, and the kind of quiet determination that Robert would have recognized immediately. "Okay," I said aloud to the empty garage, to Robert's tools, to the oil stains that marked where our dreams used to sit. "Let's see what we can build." The first call I made was to Eddie Martinez, an old friend of Robert's who ran a classic car restoration shop downtown. Eddie had been to our house countless times over the years, consulting with Robert about parts and techniques, sharing stories about automotive history that could keep them talking until well past midnight. "Anna!" Eddie's voice was warm with genuine surprise and pleasure. "How are you holding up, sweetheart? I keep meaning to stop by and check on you." "I'm doing better now," I said, and realized I meant it. Eddie, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Have you heard anything about Robert's Mustang being sold? There was a pause, and I could practically hear him choosing his words carefully. I did hear something through the grapevine. Word gets around fast in the classic car community when a beauty like that changes hands. Anna, I have to tell you, a lot of us were surprised. We all knew how much that car meant to you and Robert. Do you know who bought it? Another pause, longer this time. Yeah, I do. And Anna, you're not going to like this, but I think you have a right to know. It was sold to Jim Peterson out in Millfield. He's a good guy, treats his cars right, but Eddie's voice trailed off. But what? But he paid about $15,000 less than what that car was actually worth. Your son either didn't know the real value or he was in a hurry to make a quick sale. A car like that, in the condition Robert kept it, it should have brought at least $60,000, maybe more. $60,000. Michael had told me he sold it for $45,000, which meant either he had lied to me about the sale price or someone had taken advantage of his ignorance about the car's true value. Either way, Robert's 30 years of meticulous work had been undervalued and undersold, treated as nothing more than a convenient source of vacation money. Eddie, I said, my voice steadying with each word, would you be willing to call Jim Peterson for me? I'd like to know if he was told the circumstances of the sale. Of course, honey. Jim's a straight shooter. If he knew the car was being sold out from under a grieving widow, he would have handled things very differently. Give me a day or two to reach out to him, okay? After I hung up with Eddie, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. The satisfaction of taking action instead of simply accepting whatever happened to me. For too long, I had been passive, letting other people make decisions about my life, my possessions, my future. Now I was remembering what it felt like to have agency, to investigate rather than just endure. The next call was harder. I dialed Michael's number, knowing he probably wouldn't answer, but needing to try one more time to give him the chance to make this right voluntarily. As expected, it went to voicemail. Michael, it's Mom. I found your father's letter today, the one he wrote to you about the Mustang. I think you should hear what he wanted to tell you. Call me back, please. This is important. He didn't call back that day, or the next. But on the third day, my phone rang at 8 in the evening, just as I was settling down with a cup of tea and one of Robert's car magazines. Mom, what's this about a letter? Michael's voice carried that familiar tone of impatience, as if I was interrupting something much more important than a conversation with his mother. Your father wrote it to you before he died. About the car, about what it meant, about his hopes for our family. I think you should come over and read it. Mom, we've been over this 1,000 times. The car is sold, the money is spent, and Jennifer and I are moving forward with our lives. I don't need to read some sentimental letter about a car that's already gone. Some sentimental letter. His father's final words to him, dismissed before he had even heard them. Michael, your father trusted you to take care of me. He believed you would honor what we built together as a family. He died thinking that you understood what the car represented, that you would protect it and protect me. Jesus, Mom. Are you listening to yourself? Dad's been dead for 7 months. You can't keep using him to guilt-trip me into feeling bad about making practical decisions. The car was an asset, I liquidated it, and we used the money for something that actually improved our quality of life. Dad would have understood that. Would he? Would Robert have understood his son selling the legacy they had built together to fund designer handbags and 5-star hotels? Would he have been proud to see his life's work reduced to unexpected resources for his daughter-in-law's birthday celebration? I spoke with Eddie Martinez today, I said quietly. He told me the car was worth at least $60,000. You sold it for $45,000. Either you were cheated or you lied to me about the sale price. The silence stretched between us, and I could almost hear Michael's mind racing, trying to decide which version of the truth would cause him the least inconvenience. Look, Mom, these things happen. The car market is complicated, and I had to sell it quickly. I did the best I could under the circumstances. What circumstances? What was so urgent that you couldn't wait? Couldn't ask for advice? Couldn't even tell me what you were planning? The circumstances were that Jennifer's birthday was coming up, and I wanted to do something special for her. She's been so patient with all the drama since Dad died, and she deserved to have something beautiful in her life instead of constantly dealing with other people's grief and depression. Other people's grief. My husband's death had become an inconvenience for Jennifer, a source of drama that she had patiently endured while waiting for someone to make it worth her while. "Michael," I said, feeling something crystallize inside me, something hard and clear and unbreakable. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. I am going to get that car back." He laughed, actually laughed, as if I had told him I was planning to fly to the moon. "Mom, you can't just get it back. It's not yours anymore. It was sold legally, and the buyer has every right to keep it. We'll see about that." What's that supposed to mean? But I had already hung up. For the first time in our conversation, I had been the one to end the call, to decide when we were finished talking, to refuse to continue explaining myself to someone who had already decided that my feelings didn't matter. I sat in the quiet kitchen, feeling strangely calm despite the enormity of what I had just committed myself to doing. I was going to get the car back, somehow. Not because it was practical or easy or guaranteed to succeed, but because it was right. Because Robert's legacy deserved better than being converted into vacation photos. Because 30 years of marriage and love and shared dreams were worth more than $45,000, no matter what Michael and Jennifer thought. More than that, I was going to prove something to myself, that I was still the woman Robert had fallen in love with, the person who had been strong enough to build a life and a marriage and a family. The individual who existed before grief had made me small and apologetic and grateful for scraps of attention from people who should have loved me unconditionally. I opened Robert's address book and began making a list of phone numbers. Car collectors, mechanics, restoration experts, people who had known and respected my husband, people who understood that some things were more valuable than their monetary worth, people who might be very interested to know that Robert Morrison's Mustang had been sold under questionable circumstances by a son who had never appreciated its true significance. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too small, too temporary, too easy to dismiss or wait out. This was something deeper and more enduring, a quiet determination to reclaim not just a car, but my own sense of worth, my own right to be treated with dignity and respect. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked steadily as I worked, marking time that no longer felt empty or endless. For the first time since Robert's death, I had a purpose beyond simply surviving each day. I had a mission that would require intelligence, persistence, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from finally understanding that being nice doesn't protect you from people who are willing to be cruel. As I wrote down names and phone numbers, I could almost hear Robert's voice encouraging me, reminding me of the woman I had been when we first met, the person who had been brave enough to take on a 30-year restoration project with a man who believed that broken things could be made beautiful again with enough patience and love. "Okay, Robert," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's see what we can rebuild." Eddie called me back 2 days later, and I could hear the excitement in his voice before he even began speaking. "Anna, you're not going to believe this. I talked to Jim Peterson, and he's as upset about this situation as we are. Turns out he bought the car through an intermediary, some guy who claimed to be handling the sale for a family that needed quick cash due to medical expenses." My heart started beating faster. Medical expenses? That's what Jim was told. The seller said it was an elderly couple who needed to liquidate assets quickly to pay for cancer treatment. Jim felt so bad for them that he agreed to pay asking price without negotiating, and he even expedited the paperwork so they could have the money immediately. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of deception that went far beyond what I had imagined. Not only had Michael sold our car without telling me, but he had apparently lied to the buyer about why it was being sold, manipulating the man's compassion to ensure a quick, no-questions-asked transaction. "There's more," Eddie continued. "Jim says he's been feeling guilty about the purchase ever since he took delivery. Something about the whole transaction felt wrong to him, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. When I told him the real story, that it was Robert's car being sold by his son without the widow's knowledge, he was furious. What does that mean for getting it back? Well, that's the interesting part. Jim says if he can be assured that the sale was conducted without proper authorization, he'd be willing to discuss returning the car. He's not interested in profiting from what might amount to theft, even if it was technically legal. Theft. The word hit me like a physical blow, but also like a validation. What Michael had done wasn't just insensitive or thoughtless. It was a form of theft, taking something that belonged to both of us and converting it to his own use without consent or consideration. But Anna, Eddie's voice became more serious. You need to understand that this could get complicated. Jim would want some kind of legal assurance that he won't be stuck in the middle of a family dispute. And there's the question of the money. Even if Michael was willing to return it, which seems unlikely, the cash has already been spent. That evening, I sat down with a legal pad and began mapping out everything I knew about the situation. Michael's lies to me about needing money quickly, his deception to the buyer about medical expenses, the fact that the car had been sold significantly below market value, suggesting either incompetence or additional dishonesty about the true sale price. But more importantly, I began researching the legal aspects of what had happened. The car had been titled in both Robert's and my name, which meant Michael had needed my signature or some form of legal authorization to transfer ownership. How had he managed to sell it without my involvement? The answer came when I called our insurance agent, Sarah Williams, who had handled our automotive policies for over 15 years. Anna, I wondered when you'd call about this, Sarah said when I explained why I was phoning. I have to admit, I was surprised when Michael brought in those documents claiming power of attorney over your affairs. Power of attorney? The words came out as a croak. He said you were too distraught after Robert's death to handle financial matters, and that you had signed papers giving him authority to manage your assets. I asked if you wanted to be present for the policy transfer, but he said you were too emotionally fragile to deal with insurance paperwork. Too emotionally fragile. Too distraught. My son had convinced an insurance agent that I was mentally incompetent in order to facilitate the theft of my car, and I hadn't even known it was happening. Sarah, I never signed any power of attorney documents. I never gave Michael authority to sell that car or transfer the insurance or make any decisions about my assets. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like minutes. Anna, if that's true, then we have a very serious problem. Fraudulent power of attorney is a criminal offense, not just a civil matter. You need to speak with a lawyer immediately. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was upset, although I was, but because I was planning. For the first time since Robert's death, my mind was working with the kind of focused intensity that had once made me good at my job, good at managing our household, good at solving problems that seemed insurmountable to other people. Michael had underestimated me. He had assumed that grief had made me permanently passive, that I would accept his explanation and his authority without question. He had counted on my love for him to make me compliant, on my desire to maintain family harmony to keep me from fighting back. He had been wrong about all of it. The lawyer I consulted, Helen Rodriguez, was a woman in her 60s who specialized in elder abuse cases. Her office was comfortable but professional, lined with law books and filled with the kind of quiet competence that comes from decades of fighting for people who had been taken advantage of by those they trusted most. Mrs. Morrison, what your son did constitutes several potential crimes, Helen said after reviewing the documents I had brought. Fraudulent power of attorney, theft by deception, potentially fraud in the inducement if he lied to the buyer about the circumstances of the sale. But can we get the car back? That's the interesting question. The buyer was an innocent party, acting in good faith based on false information. However, if we can establish that the sale was conducted through fraudulent means, there are legal remedies available. The challenge will be proving that your son knowingly misrepresented the facts. Helen leaned back in her chair, studying me with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen many victims of family betrayal. I have to ask you this directly. Are you prepared for the consequences of pursuing this legally? Criminal charges could result in your son facing jail time. Civil action could destroy your relationship permanently. Are you certain this is the path you want to take? I thought about Robert's letter, about his trust that Michael would take care of me. I thought about Jennifer's laughter as she showed off her vacation photos, about Michael's dismissal of my grief as drama, about the way they had reduced 30 years of marriage to unexpected resources. Helen, they destroyed our relationship when they decided to treat me as an obstacle instead of family. I'm not pursuing this to hurt Michael. I'm pursuing it because what he did was wrong, and because that car represents more than just money to me." She nodded slowly. "In that case, let's see what we can accomplish." Over the following week, Helen's office became a nerve center of investigation and legal strategy. We documented every aspect of the fraudulent sale, gathered evidence of Michael's deception, and built a case that painted a clear picture of deliberate manipulation designed to deprive me of my property. The breakthrough came when Helen's investigator discovered that Michael had not only forged the power of attorney documents, but had also opened a separate bank account where he had deposited the sale proceeds, keeping them separate from any joint accounts that might have raised questions about the source of the funds. "This establishes intent," Helen explained. "He knew he was doing something wrong, or he wouldn't have gone to such lengths to conceal the money trail. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source: Jennifer's social media posts. Her detailed documentation of their Dubai vacation, complete with timestamps and location tags, provided a perfect record of exactly how the stolen money had been spent. "Your daughter-in-law may have done us a tremendous favor," Helen observed, scrolling through Jennifer's Instagram account. "Every spa treatment, every designer shopping spree, every five-star dinner, it's all documented here with dates and locations that correspond exactly to when the car sale was finalized." As we prepared to contact Jim Peterson's attorney about returning the car, I felt something I had almost forgotten existed: the quiet confidence that comes from being in the right, from fighting for something that matters, from refusing to be dismissed or diminished by people who had counted on my silence. Michael had taught me an important lesson, though not the one he had intended. He had shown me that love without respect is worthless, that family bonds without mutual consideration are meaningless, that being nice to people who treat you badly only enables them to treat you worse. The woman who had accepted his casual dismissal of her grief, who had apologized for her own feelings, who had shrunk herself to fit other people's comfort levels, that woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous to people who mistook kindness for weakness. I was no longer the grieving widow who could be manipulated with promises of family harmony. I was Robert Morrison's wife, and I was coming to reclaim what belonged to us both. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing legal documents at my kitchen table. Michael's name appeared on my phone screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something told me this conversation would be different from all the others. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the underlying panic. "Can you come over tonight? Jennifer's making dinner." Jennifer's making dinner. After everything that had happened, he still thought I could be managed with the promise of a home-cooked meal and false family harmony. "I'm busy tonight, Michael. What did you want to discuss?" "Look, some lawyer called me yesterday asking questions about Dad's car. I don't know what you've told them, but you're making this into a much bigger deal than it needs to be." Some lawyer. As if Helen Rodriguez was just a random person I'd hired to cause trouble, rather than a respected attorney who specialized in cases exactly like mine. "The lawyer is asking questions because what you did was illegal, Michael. You forged documents, lied to the buyer, and stole my property. Those aren't accusations. They're facts." "Jesus Christ, Mom. I didn't steal anything. The car was legally part of Dad's estate, and as his son, I had every right to make decisions about how to handle his assets." "Actually, Michael, you didn't. The car was titled in both our names, which means you needed my consent or legal authorization to sell it. Since you forged the power of attorney documents, what you did constitutes theft, fraud, and elder abuse." The silence stretched between us, and I could almost hear him trying to figure out how much I actually knew, how much evidence I had gathered, how serious the legal trouble he was facing might be. "Mom, look, maybe I made some mistakes with the paperwork. Maybe I should have handled things differently, but you have to understand, I was trying to help both of us. You were so depressed after Dad died, so lost and confused. I thought taking care of the car situation would be one less thing for you to worry about. One less thing for me to worry about." He was still trying to frame theft as kindness, deception as protection, betrayal as care. "Michael, I've seen the bank records. I know about the separate account where you deposited the money. I know about the lies you told Jim Peterson about medical expenses. I know about every spa treatment and designer handbag that Jennifer bought with the proceeds from selling my husband's legacy. Another silence. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The condescending patience was gone, replaced by something sharper and more desperate. Okay, fine. You want to play hardball? Let's talk about hardball. You drag me into court over this, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of mother you've been. How you've been manipulating me with guilt ever since Dad died. How you've been using his memory to control my life and my marriage. The threat hung in the air between us, and I realized this was the moment I had been preparing for without knowing it. This was the test of everything I had learned about myself over the past months. Everything I had discovered about the difference between being loved and being tolerated. Michael, I said, my voice steady and clear, do whatever you think you need to do. But understand this. I am not the broken, helpless woman you've been taking advantage of for the past 7 months. I am your father's wife, and I am going to get that car back. I hung up before he could respond, and for the first time in our relationship, I felt no guilt about ending a conversation on my terms. Helen called me an hour later with news that changed everything. Anna, Jim Peterson's attorney, contacted me this morning. Jim wants to meet with you personally before he makes any decision about returning the car. He's agreed to bring the Mustang to Eddie Martinez's shop tomorrow afternoon so you can see it, and so he can hear your side of the story directly. My hands started shaking. After all these months, after all the legal maneuvering and investigation, I was going to see Robert's car again. The drive to Eddie's shop felt like traveling through time. Every street corner, every traffic light, every familiar landmark reminded me of drives Robert and I had taken in the Mustang. Sunday afternoon cruises with no destination except the pleasure of being together in a car we had restored with our own hands. Eddie was waiting for me when I arrived, his weathered face creased with concern and anticipation. He's not here yet, but he called about 10 minutes ago. Should be here any moment. We stood together in the afternoon sunlight, two people who understood that cars could be more than transportation, that restoration was a form of love, that some things were worth fighting for regardless of their monetary value. The sound reached me before I saw it. The distinctive rumble of a perfectly tuned V8 engine, the mechanical poetry that Robert had spent 30 years composing. My heart clenched as the familiar red shape rounded the corner, chrome gleaming in the sunlight, paint reflecting the sky like a mirror. Jim Peterson was younger than I had expected, maybe 45, with the careful movements of someone who understood the value of what he was driving. He parked the Mustang gently, turned off the engine with obvious reluctance, and sat for a moment before getting out. When he finally emerged from the driver's seat, his expression was a mixture of admiration for the car and regret for the circumstances that had brought us together. Mrs. Morrison, he said, extending his hand. I'm Jim Peterson, and I have to tell you, I'm ashamed to be part of this situation. The three of us stood around the car like mourners at a funeral, each of us understanding that this wasn't just about ownership or legal rights, but about something more fundamental, about truth, about respect, about the difference between what's legal and what's right. She's beautiful, Jim said softly, running his hand along the car's flank. Your husband was a master craftsman. Every detail is perfect, every component restored to better than original condition. I've never seen work of this quality. I walked around the car slowly, seeing Robert's handiwork in every carefully chosen detail. The chrome bumpers he had polished until they gleamed like jewelry. The leather seats he had conditioned with products researched and selected over months of careful consideration. The engine bay where every component was positioned with the precision of a watchmaker. But more than the craftsmanship, I could feel his presence. In the driver's seat where his hands had gripped the steering wheel. In the passenger seat where I had sat beside him on countless drives. In the careful attention to details that only someone who truly loved cars would notice or appreciate. Mr. Peterson, I said finally, I want you to know that I don't blame you for any of this. You were lied to, manipulated into a transaction that never should have happened. But this car? It's not just an asset or a collectible. It's the story of my marriage. 30 years of shared dreams and Saturday mornings and the kind of love that builds something beautiful together. Jim nodded, his eyes never leaving the car. "Mrs. Morrison, I've been restoring cars for 20 years, and I've never owned anything this special, but I can't enjoy it knowing how I came to have it. If you want it back, it's yours. I don't want any money, and I don't want to profit from your son's deception." The generosity of his offer hit me like a wave of emotion I hadn't expected. Here was a stranger, someone who owed me nothing, offering to give up something valuable because it was the right thing to do. "Mr. Peterson, I can't ask you to simply absorb the financial loss. You paid for this car in good faith. Mrs. Morrison, some things are more important than money. Your son stole this from you, and I don't want to be part of that theft, even accidentally." As we discussed the details of returning the car, I felt something shifting inside me. Not just relief or gratitude, but a kind of recognition. Here was what integrity looked like. Here was what it meant to do the right thing, even when it was costly, even when it was inconvenient, even when no one would force you to act honorably. The contrast with my son's behavior was so stark it almost took my breath away. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen making plans for the car's return, Michael called again. This time his voice was different, smaller, more desperate, stripped of the arrogant confidence he had displayed just days earlier. "Mom, please, let's work this out between us. Don't make this a legal thing. I'll find a way to pay Peterson back. I'll make this right. But please don't destroy our family over a car." "Michael," I said quietly, "you destroyed our family when you decided to treat me as an obstacle instead of your mother. When you forged documents and lied to strangers and spent money stolen from my grief on luxury vacations. I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. But I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything?" For a moment, I almost wavered, almost let his appeal to blood and history override everything I had learned about the difference between being loved and being used. But then I thought of Robert's letter, still unread by the son it was meant for. I thought of Jim Peterson's integrity, his willingness to sacrifice financially to do what was right. I thought of the woman I had been before grief made me small, and the woman I was becoming as I fought to reclaim my dignity. Being my son means everything, Michael. That's why what you did was unforgivable. The morning I drove the Mustang home was the first morning in 8 months that I woke up without the weight of grief pressing against my chest. Not because the pain of losing Robert was gone. That would always be part of me. But because I had finally reclaimed something that made his memory whole again. Jim Peterson had insisted on personally delivering the car to my driveway, refusing any compensation beyond the knowledge that it was returning to where it belonged. As I signed the transfer papers, he shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who understood that integrity sometimes costs money, but always pays dividends in self-respect. "Mrs. Morrison," he said as he prepared to leave in the pickup truck that had followed him to my house, "I hope you'll bring the car to some of the classic car shows around here. People should see what real restoration looks like, and they should know the story behind it. The story behind it. For so long, I had been afraid that Robert's story would end with his death, that the car would become just another collectible in someone else's garage, disconnected from the love and dedication that had created it. Now I understood that the story was still being written, and I was the one holding the pen. The first drive was almost ceremonial. I started the engine in my driveway and sat for a moment, listening to the rumble that Robert had tuned to perfection, feeling the steering wheel that his hands had gripped thousands of times. The car felt like putting on a favorite sweater that had been lost and found again. Familiar, comforting, exactly right. I drove slowly through the neighborhood, past houses where I had lived as a wife and mother and member of a family that seemed, for a while, permanent and unbreakable. But the woman behind the wheel now was different from the one who had driven these streets 8 months ago. Stronger, clearer, less willing to make herself small for other people's convenience. The car handled exactly as Robert had tuned it. Responsive, smooth, powerful when asked but gentle when treated with respect. Every gear shift, every turn, every acceleration brought back memories of the man who had loved me enough to teach me that beautiful things were worth the work they required. 3 days later, Helen Rodriguez called with the final resolution of the legal case. "Anna, Michael's attorney contacted me this morning. He's agreed to plead guilty to the fraud charges in exchange for restitution and community service. No jail time, but he'll have a criminal record, and he'll be required to pay damages for the emotional distress and legal costs you incurred. Justice. Not the vengeful kind that destroys people, but the restorative kind that acknowledges wrongdoing and requires accountability. Michael would face consequences for his actions, but he would also have the opportunity to learn from them and become a better person, if he chose to take it. There's something else, Helen continued. He asked his attorney to deliver a message to you. He wants to read his father's letter. That afternoon, I sat in my garage with Robert's letter in my hands, waiting for the son I had raised to arrive, and finally hear the words his father had written in love and hope and trust. When Michael's car pulled into the driveway, I felt none of the anxiety or desperate hopefulness that had characterized our interactions for months. Instead, I felt the calm confidence of someone who had fought for what mattered and won, not through manipulation or guilt, but through determination and the support of people who understood the difference between what's legal and what's right. Michael looked older when he got out of his car, worn down by the consequences of choices that had seemed so reasonable when they were made in secret. He walked into the garage slowly, like someone approaching a grave, and stopped when he saw me sitting beside the Mustang. "Mom," he said, and for the first time in months, his voice carried no impatience, no condescension, no suggestion that I was inconveniencing him by existing. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." I handed him the letter without speaking, watching as he recognized his father's handwriting on the envelope, seeing his face change as he realized what he was holding. He read it standing up, leaning against Robert's workbench, his expression shifting from curiosity to understanding to something that looked like grief for opportunities that could never be recovered. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and looked at the car with eyes that finally seemed to see what it represented. "He trusted me," Michael said quietly. "Dad trusted me to take care of you, and I used that trust to hurt you instead." "Yes," I said, because there was no point in softening the truth or making his guilt easier to bear. "You did. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it, Michael. Some things once broken don't go back to the way they were before, but you can choose to be different going forward. You can choose to be the man your father believed you could become." We sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the tools and memories of a life that had been built on patience, dedication, and the belief that beautiful things were worth the work they required. The Mustang gleamed in the afternoon light, every surface reflecting Robert's love and skill, every detail proof that some things could survive even the worst kinds of betrayal. "Jennifer filed for divorce," Michael said eventually. "When she found out about the criminal charges, when she realized her vacation photos were being used as evidence in court, she decided I wasn't the kind of husband she wanted anymore. I felt no satisfaction in his pain, no sense of vindication that his marriage had collapsed under the weight of choices that had seemed so appealing when they were made in secret. Jennifer had shown him exactly who she was when she encouraged him to dismiss my grief and sell my car for her pleasure. Now he was learning what it felt like to be discarded when someone decided he was no longer useful to them. "I'm sorry, Michael. I know you loved her." Did I? Or did I love the way she made me feel about myself? The way she looked at me when I could give her expensive things and take her to places she wanted to go? It was a question he would have to answer for himself, but asking it was a start. "Mom," he said as the afternoon shadows grew longer, "I know I don't have the right to ask this, and I know you might say no, but would you teach me about the car? About what Dad was trying to show me all those years when I was too young or too stupid to pay attention?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw past the man who had betrayed my trust to the boy who had once sat on an overturned bucket, asking endless questions about carburetors and timing chains. That boy was still there, underneath the mistakes and the selfishness and the poor choices that had brought us to this moment. "We'll start with the basics," I said, getting up and walking over to Robert's tool cabinet. "Hand me that socket wrench set. Your father always said the most important thing about restoration was learning to see potential in things that other people had given up on." As Michael fumbled with tools he hadn't touched in 20 years, as he listened with the attention of someone who finally understood what he had almost lost forever, I felt something shift in the space between us. Not forgiveness. That would take time, and trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, carefully. the way you restore a classic car one component at a time. But there was possibility. The possibility that broken things could be made beautiful again, with enough patience and love. The possibility that people could learn from their mistakes and choose to be better. The possibility that families, like cars, could survive even the worst kinds of damage if someone was willing to do the work required to make them whole. That evening, after Michael left with grease under his fingernails and the beginning of understanding in his eyes, I took the Mustang for a long drive through the countryside. The sun was setting behind hills that Robert and I had explored together, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that made everything look like a painting. I drove with the windows down, feeling the wind in my hair and the power of the engine beneath me, understanding finally that some things are too valuable to be sold, too important to be abandoned, too beautiful to be reduced to unexpected resources for other people's dreams. The road stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I hadn't imagined when I thought my story was ending with Robert's death. I had discovered that I was stronger than I knew, braver than I believed, and more valuable than people who didn't love me properly had tried to convince me. Most importantly, I had learned that dignity isn't something other people can take away from you. It's something you choose to claim for yourself, one decision at a time, one day at a time, 1 mile at a time down roads that lead wherever you decide to go. As I drove home in the gathering darkness, the Mustang's headlights cutting through shadows that no longer seemed threatening, I understood that Robert's legacy wasn't just a car. It was the knowledge that love, real love, builds things that last. That patient work creates beauty, that some promises are worth keeping, even when keeping them requires you to fight for what you believe in. I had kept my promise to him, and to myself. I had reclaimed what belonged to us both, and now, with the open road ahead and the sound of a perfectly tuned engine singing beneath me, I was ready to discover what came next in a story that I was finally brave enough to write for myself.